CHEK Podcasts.
Hey everyone, and welcome to Political Capital, your source for all the latest in BC politics. I'm your host, Rob Shaw, coming to you live from the CHEK News World headquarters here in Victoria. Another busy week in BC politics. We're going to talk by-election results, government's new free air conditioner program, decriminalization, and more. And to do it, as we do every week, we bring in the Pod Squad to break all of this down. Allie, Jeff, and Jillian are here. Thank you, as always, for helping us understand the crazy mixed-up world of BC politics. We're going to start with the by-election. It happened last week just after we recorded, so we haven't had a chance to discuss the results, but I guess it's no surprise that NDP candidates Ravi Parmar and Joan Phillip won in the ridings of Langford-Juan de Fuca and Vancouver-Mount Pleasant, respectively. But in Langford, we saw the official opposition party, BC United, finish fourth with only 8% of the vote, and we saw the Conservatives, who haven't even run there before, land place second place with almost 20% of the vote. And so what do we think of this collapse of the BC United? Is it a warning sign? Does it mean nothing because this was a safe NDP riding? Jeff, why don't we start with you on your by-election thoughts?
Sure. Winners and losers here. NDP won 2 seats. New young MLA, new Indigenous MLA, and a voter endorsement that the Premier is the best suited to tackle the big challenging issues that we face today. So it's a win for them. It's also a win for the BC Conservatives. Look, to 20%, second place ahead of the Greens and BC United in Juan de Fuca with an okay candidate, not a lot of money, not a lot of organization, and talking points from social media and a few good local ideas. So that's something to build off of. That's momentum from nothing to second. It was a difficult by-election result for the Greens. They fell to third from second in both of those ridings, and so there's going to be some soul searching there. But holy lifting, BC United, that's the biggest political flameout since Barry Goldwater in 1964, Hillary Clinton in 2016, or dare I say, Rita Johnson and Social Credit in 1991. These are big. This is a big box store riding. This is lots of families. It's working class people. It's exactly the kind of people that Kevin Falcon needs to connect with and make headway with to win the next provincial election, and just an utter collapse. So a lot of soul searching and recalibrating needed on that BC United side if they want to avoid Falcon being less successful than Andrew Wilkinson.
Mm-hmm. Allie, 10 years ago, the BC Liberals had 30% of the vote in Langford-Juan de Fuca. Now it's 8%. Under a new name, granted, and there are issues with that, but what do you make of this?
By-elections aren't necessarily barometers for success for main elections. We all know that voter turnout's low. Just awareness of the issues are also low during by-elections because you're not campaigning across the province. But they are good indicators for tactics and themes that parties would potentially use in the main election. And in this one, in my observation, I saw all the parties but one be bold in their issues and be bold in who they put forward. We saw the Greens really take a stance on healthcare. Like that was their main issue. And they did very, very a good job of putting it out there and putting some ideas out there. Even the Conservatives, and I think this attributes to their success, the BC Conservatives and Mike Harris, he repeated transit over and over again. Like I'm convinced that man at the doors, that was all he said, and stuck to his main issue because it worked. Maybe they did some polling or petitions, I don't know what, but they found that one issue and they just stuck with it, and it obviously worked because they came in second. But that message discipline can be favorable for campaigns. And then with the BC United, safety was their big issue. But what I didn't see is the BC NDP come out with anything new or take any bold stance on anything. And rather they relied on the fact that they were government and that they're the NDP. And then particularly with Ravi on the island, that he was John Horgan's guy. So I'm convinced that at the doorsteps, all he said was, I'm John Horgan's guy. And what's what's very interesting about that one is that this was an opportunity not to campaign to win. He was obviously going to win it. It's a safe seat, but it was an opportunity for him to see if he had cabinet potential. And I don't think he successfully did that. So if in the fall, if there happens to be a reshuffle or anything in the next year, I would be disappointed if they wasted a cabinet position on him, because I didn't necessarily see much come out of that campaign for Ravi. For Joan, on the other hand, she has decades of experience, and so they would be lucky to have her on cabinet.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's interesting. There's polling out this week that kind of seems to sort of match up with that idea of the issues that the candidates chose to run on, and healthcare and public safety are ones that voters are really upset about, and yet they still think the NDP's best positioned to handle them, and kind of that weird sort of dynamic that looks like it played out in the by-election as well. Jillian, what do you think?
Yeah, I think, the Conservative surge was kind of the only surprise. Other than that, it's not, the results don't tell us much more than, what we already thought from provincial-wide polling that's been quite consistent since 2020 in terms of where the parties are at overall. I think, that was really interesting because nobody saw it coming. I think Allie makes a really good point about local issues. That was sort of the only local issue I saw from any of the campaigns, and I think it's a good reminder of how powerful that can be. But, I think while this could certainly chip away at the BC United vote, it's going to be interesting to see if the Conservatives can parlay the success that they saw in this riding in the next provincial election. They've got a leader who hasn't been talking about these kind of more practical issues. Harris was talking about low taxes, about transit, whereas the Conservative leader, John Rustad, seems to be more prone to sort of getting caught up in more culture wars things, which we didn't see benefit them in Vancouver Mount Pleasant. So it'll be interesting to see if this is a flash in the pan or a sort of thing that's really going to shake up the provincial dynamics.
Yeah, it's a great point because it's hard to understand really what the Conservatives stand for based on these two by-elections. Two totally different campaigns. One is social issues in Vancouver and the other is kind of economic local issues in Langford. They do well in one, but not in the other. But neither is part of a platform or a position, and neither. It's a good point. It's hard to tell what this means for the Conservatives, other than a little bit of bragging rights for now. Jillian, let's stay with you though on the Greens. We haven't talked much about them in the races. Jeff touched on it, but they held steady or lost a little bit of ground depending on how you look at it. What do you think?
Yeah, in Langford, they ran a real campaign and they got about their 2020 vote share. So it's not a disaster, but I think they were definitely hoping to do better. Like I said, they invested in the riding. They had a good candidate and campaigned a lot there. So I think, it was a little bit disappointing for them for sure. It gives them valuable information, like Ali said, that they're kind of in this interesting dynamic where they need to break out of the traditional issues that they campaign on to have wider appeal, but they still need to make sure that they're taking care of the base. I think it's possible that they actually did change some minds and get more people out, but because they didn't focus on traditional green issues, they didn't turn out some of that traditional base that they normally see campaigning on environmental issues. And I think that's what happened in Vancouver Mount Pleasant. They didn't campaign a whole lot there. Their vote share went down, but I'd be willing to bet if it was a provincial election with the normal turnout that we get, it would be back to where it normally is. And it's just a case of those folks not turning out. But yeah, definitely some back to the drawing board for them, because I think they want to do better than they did in 2020, not just maintain where they're at.
Mm-hmm. It's a great point, though. They have to pick up on issues that aren't usual green issues, and they've been doing that. They have transit bus passes and healthcare and things, but also maintain that base. You're right. That's a position that the Greens are going to have to figure out. Allie, the name change, BC United, it still makes sense, right? Like the goal is to disassociate from the federal Liberals at a time when Justin Trudeau's popularity is getting worse and create this new brand. Still seems like the right call, but just they're having trouble kind of getting it through that voter fog, which, as Kevin Falcon put it, I think we all anticipated was going to be a challenge.
Yeah, the party internally had overwhelming support to change the name for a number of reasons. The name change was a large contributing factor to just everything. with this by-election. I mean, it's the new branding, it's the new colors, it's the new image, it's everything. So it's not just the name itself. I think voters tend to hold on to the issues or what candidates are saying and their stance on issues rather than the name change. But we are not a country of card-carrying members like the United States in comparison. Like, you're born a Democrat or you're born a Republican. Like, here we change our political parties a lot more and our values a little bit more than in other countries in North America. And so I'm not convinced that the name change is like the be all and end all of like why the results laid where they did. I think it was more so the issues. We weren't really talking about a whole lot. And I'll say this about the Conservatives, that whether you like what they're saying or not, you understand where they lay on issues. Like, they are very, very good at contrast messaging. It's something that in my observation of the Alberta election, Danielle Smith would have been more successful in starting this earlier of how is she different from the NDP in Alberta. It's something that the Conservatives do very well here is, you know that they're not the NDP, you know that they're not what they call BC Liberals, BC United, because they set themselves apart. Issues set people apart, not necessarily the name change.
Mm-hmm. Jeff, what do you think about NDP complacency? It's really the only negative you could think of for a by-election in which they did very well and won 2 seats. Does it keep the fire lit to run hard against other candidates, or is there any downside at all to the NDP here? Any messages or lessons they should take away? They won. In our first past post system, you either win or you lose, and they won. So that's good for them.
So these are by-elections that everyone said cakewalk for the NDP, but I know from the party side and the people who were working in those ridings and who were running those by-elections that folks took nothing for granted. They busted their tails. They worked really, really hard. And that's a big reason why the NDP won the ridings so handily. I do want to go back to something that Allie said about Ravi Parmar being just John Horgan's guy. I suppose that's true if you discount the fact that he and his family came to Canada with nothing and built their lives for themselves from nothing, that he got involved in politics at a really young age, got elected to the school board, chaired the school board, got schools built, and won a by-election where he got 50% of the vote. And maybe he'll get in cabinet, maybe he won't, but I'm pretty sure I know who's not going to be in cabinet and anytime soon, and that's the party that came in 4th place, got 8% of the vote in the riding, and didn't get enough votes to even get their election deposit back. And I think it's not a helpful thing when you have young people getting involved in politics to, as a first point out of the gate, to try and run them down and to make them into less than they are. What folks in Langford, Juan de Fuca are very fortunate to have a very accomplished and strong young person to represent their riding, and they'll have him for years to come. And someday he'll be in cabinet.
Yeah, he's a step at a time, though, in the sense that, we've all been waiting for him to take the riding. John Horgan endorsed him. John Horgan campaigned with him. John Horgan was there on election night, trash talking the Liberals. He's not an EB guy, and I guess that's the point of sort of being a larger point that we've talked about in the past too, about leaders picking their candidates when and where they get to do that. In this case, Ravi's very much an older New Democrat, even though he's 28 years old, now the youngest MLA in the legislature. So, but good points on all sides of that. Let's leave the by-election for now and move on to another issue of public drug use and decriminalization. We've talked about this on previous episodes. There's different councils passing bylaws on open drug use, to prevent meth and heroin and cocaine use in parks, playgrounds, beaches, that kind of places, after the decriminalization pilot project launched in March. So this week, Port Coquitlam followed suit with its own bylaw, and Mayor Brad West, who's a longtime loyal New Democrat, just ripped the NDP government for, in his words, being out of touch with reality on how decrim and the drug policies right now are playing out on city streets. So let's go around on that, because he caught flack from certain quarters in the New Democrats for saying this. There's a counter narrative that the NDP have liked to push the last few months, that if you criticize their drug policies, you're contributing to fear and stigma and a lack of support for drug users. But at the same time, there are people, as Brad West pointed out, using parks, a birthday party with children, getting verbally accosted by a man who was openly using in the same park. And that tension is continuing to play out here. So, Jillian, why don't we start with you on this? What does it mean to have someone like that speak out publicly against, in some ways, his own party, but on behalf of what he says is actually happening out in his community?
Yeah, I think local officials, mayors and council here, they're really connected to their community, and they're hearing these kinds of concerns from their constituents on a daily basis. And so they're feeling this very urgently. Whereas, policymakers in Victoria are taking a little bit of a higher level view of things, and they're putting these policies in place that take time to have an impact. So especially when it comes to decriminalization, the rationale for that policy is to reduce stigma, in order to reduce barriers to treatment, to ensure that we're treating this as a public health crisis and not as not criminalizing people that really need medical help. But it takes a really long time for those policies to get into motion, especially because we're so lacking in treatment options. So I think what we're seeing is, the urgency and the reality on the ground that's being really acutely felt in communities, and the local officials are hearing that on a daily basis. Victoria moving a little bit too slowly, just because these are the types of things that take a long time to enact and to start to see traction on.
Mm-hmm. Victoria is moving slowly, according to West and other mayors. BC United wants the government to come back in the summer and pass some sort of provincial legislation on this. The premier this week said they'll have that legislation, but not till October. West said do it in the summer as well. So that dynamic of making the provincial government look slow on this issue is certainly a kind of a political angle as well. Jeff, what do you think of all this?
Well, if Mayor West is taking flack from some quarters of the NDP, he's not going to get any flack from this quarter of the NDP. I think his comments are, quite frankly, helpful. I think it's a pointed reminder to government that it needs to strike a better balance between saving lives and community safety. I think we've talked about this an awful lot on the show. West comes at it from a pretty balanced perspective, actually. He supports efforts to save lives, compassionate response that we've talked about and that the government is advancing. But he wants to make sure kids and families can go to parks and playgrounds and schools and feel safe. And if government is going to see through, I think, the important steps that it's taking on the drug file, then it needs to manage those issues seriously and bring solutions forward quickly. And I know that the premier has acknowledged this. He's working away at options. He's talked about the fall. The sooner, the better, as far as I'm concerned, and especially including enhanced access to treatment for people, which I think for the government, even with these issues around what's happening in public, the big weak flank for government on the whole drug policy is the challenges people have when they want to get to treatment. And so get those beds happening, get that access happening, and do it fast. Because we all want to make this work. We all want to save lives. And government needs to hear this in the positive way that it was intended and do better.
Yeah. Hopefully they hear it. I think the question, Allie.
We'll see.
Yeah. The question, Allie, is, how it's taken so long, I guess, for them to hear it. And I go back to my point, like when this came up from some mayors at the beginning in the spring, it was dismissed as fear-mongering and, anti-addictions treatment drug policy support and stigmatizing users. And the government kind of entrenched itself on this line for a while, and in very New Democrat government fashion that I've seen in the last 6 years, just didn't realize that just because people it didn't like was saying something doesn't mean it's not true. And now they finally are getting it from their own quarters and going, oh, yeah, okay, I guess we got to do something about it. That way that plays out, though, is, to me, kind of fascinating and has led us to where we are today.
Well, that's exactly it, right? That this is the champion we've kind of been waiting for, because he's not perceived, Brad West isn't perceived as a threat to the NDP. He's critical, but he's not perceived as a threat. And he's the perfect person for it, because he's a very popular mayor. He has quite a bit of profile, and he has young kids himself. So this is very good for the cause and for pushing it forward. But I've said this over and over again about the NDP. They are masterful communicators, and they are very strategic. And so this call by BC United and by some local politicians municipally to create some action now, while parks are open, while families are enjoying these public spaces, community centers, all of those spaces that they're trying to advocate to create harsher rules. That's happening right now in the summer. This is what I honestly think is what's going to happen, is that the NDP is going to wait until UBCM in September to come in and save the day. But they're going to do it because timing wise, it works out that all of the mayors and council who are upset with them will all be in the same place. They don't want to lose that political credibility. And so to the question of why are they waiting, I would hate to believe that they are waiting for a political points in September to do this in a better venue than recalling the legislature now. Those are just my tin half foil theories, but I don't want to believe that. But hopefully Brad West will be the one to champion it and get it done before UBCM.
Nobody ever recalls the legislature. I can't recall, no pun intended, any party caving into the opposition demands to recall the House to do something, except for there's a bit in COVID and whatever. Seems to
there might be an opportunity that if not on this, then certainly on your call at the SPCA press conference that happened this week.
The legislature dog.
The legislature dog. Maybe
right.
we can. Maybe you could get the dog, and then when you have back for the dog, we can get some other stuff done.
Yeah, we'll just call it Miscellaneous Statutes Amendment Bill 127, and people just vote in favor of it, and then we've got a dog, just like that. Democracy works. You just have to hide things and get it done.
He didn't say no.
He didn't say no.
when
Yeah.
asked.
All right, that is it for us this week. Thank you so much for watching. Remember, archived episodes of the show on CHEK Plus on YouTube. Make sure you subscribe to the podcast for podcast audio extras as well. And we will be back with all the latest in BC politics next week here on Political Capital.